And hello, and welcome to the Leadership Growth Hour, an interactive monthly event that features timely leadership topics and tools to grow your leadership performance. I'm your host, Daniel Stewart, executive consultant and coach and president of Stewart Leadership, a global consulting, coaching, and training firm, aligning organizations on leadership, teaming, change, and talent. In short, we develop the people side to enable your growth strategies. Today, I'm excited to be joined by accountability expert Nolan Godfrey, executive consultant and regional director at Stewart Leadership. Welcome, Nolan.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today.
The show is divided into two parts. The first half is content, conversation, and a few slides on a specific leadership topic. The second part is open Q&A from the audience on any topic without slides. So please reserve any questions you want and type them in anytime you'd like. And in fact, as we are talking, please write those questions and comments using the Q&A feature. The chat feature is not enabled during a webinar. We also have enabled the upvote feature. So you can click the thumbs up on questions you like, which will put them first on the list to make sure that we see them and make sure we answer them. Also, we will link to our slides in our show notes. So now on to today's focus area, creating a culture of accountability. So Nolan, here's a beginning question for you. What is it about accountability that makes it such a hot topic, so valuable? So many folks are always wanting more of it in some way. How would you address that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Daniel. And it's a question that could be asked any day, anytime, and I think would be relevant. One of the things that is so critical about accountability and why I think it's such a hot topic is its relationship to results. So if you think about accountability is a mindset and a set of behaviors that ultimately lead to amazing results. Some of those results are business results, the financial results that we're striving for. Many of them are the cultural and people results that we also care about in many of our professions, and those ultimately help drive the business results. So bottom line is the bottom line and the results.
So talk to me then about this proportionality, because there's this idea that results, the more accountability you get, the better results. Is that always the case? Is it true when you do the inverse? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in the truest sense of accountability, right? And as we talk further, we'll get more clear about what we mean by that. But in the truest sense of accountability, the more accountability you have, the better results you're going to have. And the less accountability, the less results. Now, you might still have a lot of results, but they may be results that are either negative or that don't matter strategically or culturally. And so as a general rule of thumb, I think that's true. Greater accountability equals greater results.
Yeah. Okay, so let's play off of this. I want to hear from folks who are listening, and they can use the Q&A feature here to type in their response. I'm curious, what's a misperception or a reaction that people have when they say or hear the word accountability? Because we've all been in meetings where we say, yeah, we need to have more accountability. And I'm going to ask Nolan to get his thoughts, but before I do that, I'd love for everybody, as well as for them to get familiar, everybody around the Q&A, type in your one word or a couple of word reaction to when you hear the word accountability. What are the things that go off in your mind? What are maybe some misperceptions as well that start coming off? And we're starting to see some responses here. You know, this instant reaction, accountability, what is it? What are some of the things that I'm seeing this? Yep, you got the KPIs, you get the, oh, the punishment. So often it's like the stick, punitive,
Yep.
responsibility, accountability.
Blame, legitimate reason for termination, right? I mean, these are,
Ooh,
yep.
no monitoring or big brother. Yes. I mean, what a lovely, warm feeling. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Micromanaging, right? Misperception one way, hinders creativity, you're caught. These are, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the scapegoating. Drew, that's a great one. Yes. So as we're looking at this, Kay Nolan, what comes to your mind? What are some of these misperceptions or reactions that we have as we hear accountability?
Yeah. So, and actually, we obviously have an extremely smart audience because they're they're capturing a lot of the misperceptions. I think there's one misperception about accountability that I would just underscore and highlight, and that is this: it's captured in the phrase, "I'm going to hold you accountable." And if you peel that back and you really start to define it, right? If we define accountability as simply having to provide an answer, then holding somebody accountable, it definitely leans towards this punitive, I'm going to, the proverbial stick treatment, punishment, negative consequences, right? It takes on this very negative tone. And I hear 90% of people that talk about accountability use this phrasing, I'm going to hold you accountable. I think many of us do it without thinking about it and maybe not intending it the way that it comes across. So for me, that really underscores some of the problems and why I think accountability, has gotten a really bad rap over time and has become, for the most part, a negative word.
And for those of you with a screen here, we'll just have a couple of slides today. One is one that I just put up here, referencing what Nolan was talking about with this accountability myth. I need to hold you accountable. And then this accountability truth of I need to create an environment where you hold yourself accountable. And Nolan, as we look at these phrases, is it just a provocative thing to say? Or is this, is this a hyperbole? Are we just exaggerating? Because really it's fundamentally the leader's job to hold them accountable. That's what but rather what you're suggesting is to mindset shift this.
Yeah.
And to do it in a very different perspective. What does that really mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I like a couple of these responses in here for because they capture the essence of this. So I'm seeing the ownership word at least a couple of times, right? And so one of the underlying principles that is so important in creating a culture of accountability is having a mindset that we're all adults, that we are all operating in an adult to adult relationship. And where accountability gets a really bad rap and where it goes sideways is when leaders start to act like they are parents and their direct reports are children. Because these poor behaviors, this punishment mindset, this I'm going to send you to timeout or you're going to turn and face the corner or whatever it is, they start to take hold. When you have an adult to adult relationship, then as a leader, you are trying to help that individual succeed, right? Your role is to help enable them to succeed and to do the very best that they can with the assumption that they genuinely want to do their best, that they're bringing the desire, the motivation, the willingness to work and to get the job done. And so in that environment, ownership really can take hold. And if each individual is owning their own behavior, their own performance, then they will truly account for it or give an answer and updates about how they're doing what's going well, where they need help, where they may be falling short.
It's well said. So here, let's play off of this for a second. This idea, and I don't know how, I mean, we've all said this. I need to hold you accountable. There is this temptation, this lure about saying that, because at the same time, and check my thinking here, Nolan,
Yeah.
it gives me a lot of power and control over you, which can be exhilarating, frankly, for certain circumstances, certain people, or it could like puff one up and to say, yes, I can do this. Now, am I exaggerating, or how do we then also resist this temptation? Because by virtue of me not always controlling, I have to let go a little. How do we reconcile that seeming polarity here?
Yeah, so the way to reconcile it really is for the leader to exactly what we're talking about in this growth hour discussion. It's creating a culture, creating an environment where people can be accountable, they can own their performance, and truly be kind of the masters of their own fate or destiny, if you will. And as a leader, there are key steps, key behaviors that if you undertake can really strengthen and create this culture. In an individual relationship, one-on-one, for example, with a direct report. By the way, accountability doesn't always have to, it doesn't matter the hierarchy or the direct report kind of relationship. I mean, accountability is just as important with peers, with vendors, with partners, with other stakeholders, even your boss to some degree, right? If we're adults, right, that we can create an environment where we're each accountable to one another. So I think the key really is leaders modeling the way and them demonstrating the right behaviors that maximize the likelihood that people will be accountable. Now that's still a choice, right? Each individual has to make that choice. They have to be willing to own it. And what I find is sometimes with leaders or organizations that I'm working with, there are individuals that they actually don't want that choice. They don't want to be accountable. They truly don't want to own and have to answer for their results or their performance. And when that becomes clear, then we get to a point where, the choice to share that talent with the competition or encourage them to share themselves with the competition, so to speak, can be a really good choice, not only for us, but for them. But even in that situation, it doesn't have to feel punitive or like a police action or something, right? It can be respectful and positive.
This environment that you're describing, this applies to the leader as well. And so it then enables anybody in the environment to create this self-accountability approach, to be able to hold themselves. And it's tremendously affirming, frankly, because it does treat you as an adult. We so often, as you've mentioned, fall into that parent-child script, so to speak,
Right.
where we are permission seeking. And yes, that doesn't mean you willy-nilly do anything you want. However, it's this ability to be able to bring your best self, understand the boundaries and the environment, to then know how to best shine it or to exhibit it and to bring your best self, including for the leader, versus it's all on the leader's shoulders every day to catch people. And that's too often, I think, what we often will have in our minds, and as we're seeing here in the comments.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right, Daniel. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of organizations, and they tend to be the larger organizations, but that's not always the case. But I see a lot of organizations where these cultures become so pervasive that for a leader to kind of swim upstream and not play gotcha games and not be trying to catch people. It's almost like it becomes a detriment to the leader, where that's what gets reinforced and rewarded in the culture. And so it becomes pervasive. In smaller and mid-sized organizations, generally speaking, again, what I see is it's easier because that culture sometimes has not pervaded quite as significantly, but not always the case.
Gotcha. As we're talking to our listeners here, please feel free to shoot in or write in some questions if you'd like. We're happy to chat through those. Nolan, I want to go through what now? What are some ways to then help create this environment? Because if we're going to go along with this thinking of going away from all on the leader's shoulders to a leader creates the environment that people can all hold themselves accountable, including the leader themselves. What does that look like? And this is the other slide we have here that I'll bring up. Walk us through this process, this approach to create this environment.
Yeah. So this is our accountability model. There are others out there, but the idea with CMC is that there really are three things that a leader needs to do to maximize accountability, which in turn will maximize results. The first you can see here is to clarify, setting clear expectations, making sure that when an assignment is given or delegated, a project, a goal, an initiative, that there is real clarity, and that individual, that we're asking something that's reasonable of them. So often we see someone, for example, promoted into incompetence. Now, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but somebody that is promoted into a role that they are not anywhere close to being able to appropriately fill. And so we set them up for failure. They may not have the skills, they may not have the experience, they may lack the raw capacity. Now, to some degree, right, we have to work with that, and we want to do that sometimes to develop individuals. But there's this fine balance between going overboard and taking too far a leap where we're setting them up to fail, right? I like to use the very simple example. If my wife comes to me and says, "Hey, Nolan, I would like you to paint the office red." First of all, I'll say, "Are you sure that's the color you want?" But once we get past that, to get to the point where she and I are on the same page around what red actually means, that might sound like an unimportant detail or like we're micromanaging things. But if she says, "Hey, I want it red and I want it done by Friday," well, I can get that done. But how do I know that the red that I choose is actually the red that's in her mind, right? So there's this process. One of our gems, Daniel, that I think really encapsulates this. And if you were to ask me, "Hey, Nolan, if there was one thing that was critical to accountability, I mean, this is it. The single biggest hurdle to effective communication is the assumption that it's taken place, right? It's the communication. And it's a level of communication and clarity and specificity that we frequently don't arrive at. That really is a golden thread that weaves throughout all of this discussion about accountability. Is a leader being crystal clear on what they expect up front, so that they're micromanaging less on the back end.
And to quickly answer a question, yes, actually, we'll be happy to share these slides. They'll be sent out in the show notes following up as well. And just a question, there's several great questions coming in. Some we'll answer in a moment. One around the size of the team. How does the relationship of the size of a team, for example, impact the ability to create this environment of accountability? Does it make it harder? Is it impossible? Is it still realistic? Because, a small company or small department, small team, maybe different dynamics. Bigger one, yeah. How would you respond to that, Nolan? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that the size of the team in and of itself would be a primary factor. I think the things that would perhaps be more critical are, one, what is the leader's effectiveness and skill in creating this environment? And that may come more into a span of control kind of question, right? At what point is the leader not able to do these things that they need to do to create accountability? I think another key factor is who's on the team, and what percentage of the team are in roles that they're capable of fulfilling. And it doesn't mean they're perfect, but that they really have the core skills and experiences needed, versus how many individuals on the team are new to role or new to the organization where they have a steep learning curve. So there's these kinds of factors that I think become really critical when you're thinking about, how do I create accountability, and is the size of the team getting in the way? Those are a couple things I'd want to look at.
Yeah, strong comments here. Let's go to the second and third one, and then some of these other questions will be able to be great springboards to then dive a little deeper. What are the other two ways that you want to comment on to help establish that environment?
Yeah. So the next step in this model is measure. And measure is kind of the best fit word that we have, but there's extra elements to it more than just coming up with numbers or goals. This is about aligning on what are the key measures of success, whether those are qualitative or quantitative. How are we going to know that we've achieved what we need to? And it's also the methods and the frequency to observe individuals in action and to conduct reviews. And so if, as a leader, if I can agree with you on when I am going to check in, when I am going to follow up, what things we will be looking at, what the plan is that we'll be reviewing, and we're on the same page around that, what it does is, on the one hand, it could feel micromanaging to someone to say, well, wait a minute, that's heavy-handed. You're coming to observe my work, or you're coming to review what I'm doing. And yet it should have the opposite effect, where if we can agree on that, as a leader, I then shouldn't have to swoop in between reviews or observations, unless you have a problem, you have a barrier, something is getting in the way, and you're concerned that you're not going to be able to accomplish what we've agreed to. Then at that point, the individual can reach to the leader, and we can engage. So in essence, that really enables this environment, this situation where people are not being micromanaged. And yet, when we are talking about details, we know when and we know what they're going to be. And it can provide team members with a great amount of stability, because they understand what's expected, and they know that the leader's going to get out of their hair and empower them and kind of let them run with things. So
Yeah. And so let me throw the monkey wrench in for a moment, because yes, this makes sense. And so I'm looking at some of the questions, and one of them is getting at this idea of, but what if the person doesn't want it? What if we do all of these things, and we'll keep talking about the third step as well.
Yeah.
What is it? And that leader is just scratching their head because the person on their team apparently could care less. That their heart just isn't it. They're just like, nope, I don't want to. What are the steps? And again, these are all of these wacky things, but not so wacky. It's the stuff that leaders, we all deal with frequently.
Yeah.
How do you approach creating the environment with somebody that doesn't really want to engage in that environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, and I know you said it's wacky, but maybe not so wacky, right? One of the things that I see frequently is either a new leader comes in and is much more accountable and is much stronger on building accountability, right? And so people aren't used to it. and or they are stepping up their game, right? They're taking a new approach and they're saying, hey, I'm going to be more accountable and I'm going to do more of this on my team. In either situation, people that haven't been used to that, this could be a real shock for them, right? Culture shock to say, wait a minute, I was at the country club, I was kicked back and life was good, and right, and then all of a sudden, wow, there's accountability and I have to be accountable. So a lot of times when that happens, again, let's go back to the adult to adult relationship. If we're both adults, my role as the leader is to simply clarify the choices and the natural consequences of those choices. It's not to threaten, but I could have a conversation with you, Daniel, and say, look, I recognize that I am making a change in how we are accomplishing our work. And one of the expectations is that you are fully accountable for your behaviors and for the results that we agree to. That's a choice. And if you want to make that choice and you want to put the effort in, I'm here to support you and enable you and do everything I can to help you succeed. If you don't want to make that choice, you are welcome to make it, but we have to move on as a team, and you need to make the choice relatively quickly because we expect results and we need to move things forward. And so it can be a very direct, very frank, and yet very respectful conversation where we simply leave the choice with the individual.
This choice.
And I recognize it sounds easier than it is, right? I mean, we have emotions and personalities and all kinds of things that get in the way, but the underlying principles are really quite straightforward.
So speaking of these underlying principles, talk to us about this third process.
Yeah, so the third step in the model, Coach, and this, and I think most of us are familiar with this idea, right? That leader as coach. And again, if you think of any kind of sports team, the power of a coach, that coach they're not trying to get their players to fail. They're not looking for, they're not trying to create bad scenarios for them. They want them to win. They want the team to win. And so they approach things from a positive standpoint. And this is simply about playing as the coach. When you see positive things happening that you want to reinforce and reward, the positive reinforcement is so powerful for people. We so frequently forget that. And of course, there are things that need to be corrected. Of course, there's feedback or feed forward that's needed to be provided. And yet, so often, we can make so much more progress by simply reinforcing something positive that's happening, a win that someone's had, and that will make them want to do that more and to become part of their habits, part of their behaviors, right? And this other thing here about timely manner, it's important because if as the leader, if we say, well, I don't want to ruffle too many feathers, or I don't want to have a difficult conversation, then the problem is that individuals most likely know that they're maybe doing something they shouldn't be or that's misaligned, and they're actually expecting to get corrected. And when they don't get corrected, they say, oh, well, this doesn't really matter that much. This was a flavor of the month. And so it's this fine balance of corrective and constructive feedback and feed forward and addressing things head on, with also reinforcing and rewarding the positive. And one other thing I'll toss in here, Daniel, the minute the individual or the leader sees that the results are starting to veer off from what's expected, that's when we need to engage. And the most accountable individual, of course, would go to the leader and say, hey, I'm having a problem. Here's what's happening. I really need your help. Many times, of course, that doesn't happen. And so that's why having those structured, regular reviews allows for enough frequent check-ins that when things start to get off track, we can catch them early and course correct versus letting things go for months and months and months and then saying, oh, I wonder why we didn't achieve the results we were wanting. So
And so let me play something off you, Nolan. Oftentimes a leader feels that they need to have the right answers for whatever reason, either because they feel it for themselves or societal or cultural. They're a leader. They need to have the right answer. They need to know the right thing to say in the moment to the person. Okay. We want to be right. We want to have the right approach. Great. What I'm wondering about is in this notion of treating adult to adult conversations and creating an environment where both can hold themselves accountable. Does that free up? Is that helpful? Does that free up the leader to not have to have all of the right answers? Because in a way, it gives permission for the leader to have a conversation such as, hey, this is what we're striving to achieve. How can you help achieve this? Or these behaviors I'm seeing, they're not hitting there. Help me understand what can be done differently. I don't have all the answers here, but I know we're all working toward X, Y, and Z together.
yeah.
How do you see that perhaps helping in that regard?
Sure. So I think one really simple way to think about this that I find tremendously helpful and empowering both to a leader and to someone they're partnering with is what versus how. So the leader is accountable, responsible for clarifying the what is expected, what is the outcome we need to achieve. And sometimes there may be compliance or legal or customer requirements that dictate some of how we go about something. So if the leader remembers, I'm responsible for clarifying the what, the outcome, then I can empower the individual to create the how and to be very flexible. And by the way, if we find ourselves as a leader frustrated or upset or some negative emotion that we're experiencing because someone isn't doing something a particular way, we really have to look in the mirror first and say, is this really a requirement? Does this matter materially? Or am I just projecting my own preferences? And really, if we're clear about the outcome and the person is owning it and is willing to run with it, that we kind of let go. And in that scenario, that letting go can really be freeing, both to the leader and the individual.
That's a great point. And in fact, so I've turned the slides off here. Keep the questions coming. We're going to now be looking deeper at answering many of these, as many as we can. And Nolan, one of the questions that came up is a great one because it talks about the organization not as a single entity, one unique, non-dynamic thing, but rather as a group of all of these smaller groups. And so if you're leading one group and you're creating an environment of accountability for that group, and there's another group that's not holding themselves accountable in the same way, there may be rub. There might be looking over and saying, hey, they're not doing it the way how do we function? How do we work with? What are your thoughts in terms of melding and interacting with groups that have various levels of accountability?
Sure. Yeah. So, and look, I think that's probably a reality in every organization, right? No organization has this perfect culture of accountability. So I like to think of it just in terms of having a reasonable expectation, right? Stepping back and being able to see the forest for the trees, so to speak, and to say, within my team, I can influence accountability more than I can with other teams. So let's get really good at this as a team. And as we do that, then I can also start to influence. I'll give you a simple example. In a matrix organization, one of the real challenges is aligning goals. Everyone has different goals and objectives. And if I'm an accountable leader in that matrix, I can own making sure that every partner organization that I work with, that I am accountable to them, that they have clarity of what I will provide and of what I need from them. And just in that interaction, without forcing them or requiring them or anything, I have established accountability on the boundaries of my team, so to speak. Now, that assumes that most of those leaders are going to cooperate, and my experience is that most will. And that if we are influencing that way, that they will participate and they'll be willing to engage. And if we say, here's what I'm going to provide to you and your team over the next X period of time, and here are the things I need to be successful, that we can have a very positive and supportive relationship. It's not always the case, right? But I think the majority of the time that's very possible.
And so we've been talking briefly on maybe another team that's not holding themselves accountable as much. Is there a supercharge the accountability and go too much? Because any strength can run amok a little much. It can go a little too much. And there might be some teams whose standards of performance are essentially perfection, and they become toxic. And there's a great question here. How do you help another team whose leader sets such a unrealistically high standard? And apparently the way that one approach it to uphold these standards is not with a sense of learning and attention and discipline at the same time, but rather it's perhaps fear, less psychologically safe. How do you resolve and foster a sense of accountability, or frankly, inform that person that, while maybe good, well-intentioned, it creates an unhelpful environment?
Yeah. So that's a real challenge, right? Because, and I'm assuming in this example, I'm assuming that these leaders are maybe peers, right? And so part of it's going to depend on the relationship. If there's a relationship of trust and openness, and this other leader genuinely knows that you care about them and their well-being, I think that can foster this conversation much more easily to say, hey, I want to share a perspective. My intent is to be helpful and to reflect and to share some feedback with you, understanding that, if we're a peer, we don't control it, right? And that assumes a fairly positive relationship. If those things are not in place, that becomes really difficult, right? And it becomes something that ultimately that team leader has a responsibility to address. But we also have to be careful, right? That if that's the case, that we're not slandering people or gossiping or creating a negative or toxic environment because somebody's not doing things the way that we want or we expect or we think they should be done. So there's a really fine balance there.
Yeah. Well, one thing you were indirectly talking about is sometimes the stress or conflict that can emerge naturally within certain circumstances at work as we're trying to achieve lots of things going on. Let's add now the conversation around so much research that we're seeing and what we've often experienced ourselves, increased stress, particularly over the past several years, as so many of us are balancing professional and personal as well. We all bring such a wide variety of challenges with us. That's who we are as humans. How do we show a sense of respect, empathy within this environment of self-accountability while still moving things forward? How do we strike that balance, or at least strive to, particularly with the increased amounts of stress that we often are all dealing with?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really challenging balance, honestly. Daniel, I think in part you kind of answered the question from the standpoint of demonstrating empathy, right? If if the individuals that we're working with, if they understand our intent, and if that intent is to care about them, to want to support them, to want to help them succeed, regardless of hierarchies, regardless of, reporting relationships, then we can listen, right? We can listen, we can seek to understand and demonstrate and show that respect, while also dealing with the realities of what's expected and what we have to deliver. And I think when you marry those two things, then you have the most likelihood at being able to come to some resolution, right? And I could imagine a conversation. Hey, Daniel, I understand X, Y, and Z about your situation and about some of the things that are challenging for you. And at the same time, we need you to deliver A, B, and C. So Daniel, what ideas do you have? How do we reconcile that? And how can I support you as your leader in doing that? I can imagine those types of conversations. Again, they may not always go picture perfect, and people may not always be, they may not always approach it from a place of good intent, but I think the majority of the time they will, and we'll be able to get to a much better place.
Yeah. These remind me of a conversation that we can have around control, because sometimes we can approach this from a position of where we feel we have control or where we feel we do not have control. And whether you use that kind of language or simply helping somebody recognizing a difference they can make and to understand what is that potential difference. What kind of a difference can you make now? And if you changed a mindset, or if we change something, what kind of a difference can you make in the future? And it often comes down to one of two mindsets around this passive notion that control is outside of me. I cannot enact, I cannot do anything about my current environment. Or control is within me. I can do it. And I'm wondering, Nolan, how can a leader, as they're creating this environment of self-accountability, promote people to have a sense of control within them instead of keeping it outside of them, where they're like being acted upon and they instead can't act for themselves as much, or they feel they can't?
Yeah, the word that comes to mind as you describe that, Daniel, is victim, right? This victim mentality that I'm a victim, everything's happening to me, I'm out of control, what can I possibly do? So I think sometimes for leaders, and this is a difficult thing to do, but I think sometimes as leaders, we need to help individuals look in the mirror and realize that they are responding that way. A gentle way to do it would simply be to frame a question and to say, well, Daniel, I understand there are all these difficulties and all of these challenges, many of which we don't control. Let's turn that around and ask ourselves, what do we control? Where can we influence? And so that's a gentle way, without saying, hey, Daniel, you're acting like a victim. we don't have to say it that way, but we can reframe and redirect people's thinking in a simple way like that. Now, some people may need to be hit between the eyes, so to speak, right? They may need very blunt, very direct feedback. And as leaders, that's one of the difficult assessments and decisions that we need to make. At what point does someone need that to really wake up and to realize that they are not owning their situation, they're acting like a victim? So again, for me, so much of this is being thoughtful about how we approach someone, and not trying to be black and white about everything, but having these underlying principles of care, concern, and wanting an individual to succeed. How can we get to a place like that?
I love it, because you're reinforcing and reminding all of us to check our intent as well. What is our intent by virtue of why we want to have this conversation in the first place? Is it to make sure to prove we're right? Or rather, is it to help care for, love, and get things done? Because I keep going back to that care and empathy. You can say, yes, this is a hard time. Yes, what can we now do about it though?
Right.
What could we do to keep it going?
Yeah, exactly right. It's always that balance. And yet I'll be the first to say we need to deliver results. That's why we're in business. That's why we hire and employ people, is to accomplish certain results. And so if that's the case, yeah, we absolutely have to focus there.
Time for one or two other questions. Folks, you're welcome to keep chiming in. I'm continually reviewing them. Here's one on generations, Nolan. How does the different generations, how does considering the generational perspective impact as you're striving to create this environment, particularly when you may have multiple different generations within the same environment that you're trying to create? And I will raise my hand and say, I hate generalizing generations. I hate it. I don't know if that's very helpful. And yet it is a rule of thumb to guide us in certain circumstances. So I want to be very clear about that, because everybody has a unique story. It's balancing this though. Anyway, how would you kind of react or comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is similar to yours. I like generalizations because they simplify things, and I hate them for the same reason, right? Because they wash individuals out and paint with a really broad brush. So my first response is, I think what's most important is that a leader understands the individual and does not paint with a broad brush. That being said, generally what I have seen is that the older generations, I think the little bit tougher approach, I'm going to hold you accountable, that seems to be a much more standard kind of discussion and mindset. And generally speaking, I would say a more structured approach is acceptable and is expected. And that as you get into the newer generations, I think flexibility and adaptability is a much more critical component of that. And so that what versus how becomes even more important, because again, my observations, millennials and Zs, they absolutely do not want to be told how to do things or when to do things, or right. And in most cases, they shouldn't necessarily have to be, right? If we're really clear on those outcomes, we can give the flexibility. Now, some jobs don't allow for that, right? But I think there's a big portion of kind of, especially on the professional side, where there is flexibility and where let's give them outcomes and let them figure it out. So yeah, there is a little bit generationally, but definitely focus at the individual level.
Sure. And another question building on this, frankly, is this idea of metrics. When you have a set of metrics that you then share and everybody can see what the progress that individuals and or the team are making.
Yeah.
There can sometimes be that point of, oh, I feel threatened now because the person next to me is doing better or worse or whatever it is. And this comparison, how do you minimize the potential negative view that one can have of those situations? How can you streamline that to make a little bit better as you're creating this common environment?
Yeah. Well, if I was having an individual conversation and somebody said, hey, I can't believe that Joe over here is doing 2x what I'm doing. one response might be, well, again, there have to be some assumptions, right? Healthy relationship, egos in check, but maybe Joe's doing something we could learn from, right? Instead of, hey, I feel threatened. Well, let's turn it around and say, well, why can't we all elevate our game? If Joe has the secret sauce, then let's learn. Now, again, I realize there's politics, there's egos, there are these things, and so it's not always quite that simple and clear. But that would be one thing I would say. The second thing is, as a leader has an important role. So sometimes people will say to me, well, Nolan, I'm fully accountable, but I don't get the results. And right, I mean, that can certainly happen. What I would turn back and say in that situation is, well, let's uncover why we think that is. What was the plan that you were following? How were you doing the work? And what are the elements that were impacting that performance? And many times in that plan, it will hold the answers to why we weren't. Now, sometimes it's behaviors, sometimes it's, how somebody's carrying it out, skill levels, there's a bunch of factors. But generally speaking, it can frame things in a way where we can uncover, what's really driving that.
Yeah. Okay, Nolan. So here's a question for you. As we're kind of finishing up in the next few minutes, if I came to you and I said, I need to hold my leaders accountable, what would be your response?
My response would be, why do you say that? What's happening, right? And the assumption would be, well, we're not achieving the results we want to achieve. And I would then proceed to have a conversation about, well, let's talk about the degree of accountability and what you're seeing and what behaviors you're seeing on your team that's impacting that.
And then what's the main takeaway? What's the main takeaway to help create an environment to hold ourselves accountable?
Yeah. Daniel, I think the main takeaway is this, it's this CMC process, right? It's creating clarity, it's measuring our results and how we're doing, and it's coaching to the behaviors and the results. And if we do that as individuals, it will impact others that we're interacting with, and it will help engender and foster this culture of accountability.
Outstanding. Thank you, Nolan. And thank you for being part of the Leadership Growth Hour, Nolan.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a privilege, and I appreciate everyone's comments and questions and interactions throughout the hour. It's been great.
Thank you. So for our listeners, please note that our next monthly Leadership Growth Hour will be on May 10th at noon Central Time, when we will talk about helping your employees grow and stay through career development. To register for future Leadership Growth Hour events, please visit stewartleadership.com/events. We'd love to have you join us. Till next time, all the best, everybody.